My name is Paul Hebert. I'm on the Wicked Tuna show for 11 years. I own the boat Wicked Pissa, and I came down to Conley GMC.
We often look at people on television and assume we know who they really are. We see confidence, humor, and determination, and we begin to believe their lives must be as strong and steady as they appear on screen. But the truth is often far more complicated. Behind the smiles, behind the loud personalities and unforgettable moments, there are stories of struggle that rarely make it into the final cut. For fans of the hit series Wicked Tuna, Captain Paul Hebert was one of the most recognizable figures. Known for his competitive spirit, sharp instincts, and years of experience on the ocean, he built a reputation as a fisherman who never backed down from a challenge. To many viewers, he seemed larger than life, someone who thrived under pressure and lived for the thrill of the chase. But beyond the cameras, Paul's life has been marked by hardship, controversy, and deeply personal loss. And as the years passed, those struggles began to shape not only the man himself, but also the way fans saw him. This is the story of the tragedies that affected Paul Hebert, the rumors that followed him, and the painful moments that changed his life forever. To understand Paul's journey, it's important to first understand the world that made him famous. Wicked Tuna premiered to audiences fascinated by the high-stakes world of commercial bluefin tuna fishing. Set primarily in Gloucester, Massachusetts, the show followed competing captains as they battled rough seas, mechanical failures, and each other in pursuit of one of the ocean's most valuable fish. From the very beginning, Paul stood out. He was outspoken, confident, and unafraid to speak his mind. Some viewers admired his honesty, while others saw him as controversial. But whether people loved him or criticized him, one thing was undeniable: he was unforgettable. Fishing was not just a job for Paul, it was his life. Years of experience had taught him how to read the water, how to anticipate the movements of tuna, and how to lead a crew through difficult conditions. Those skills made him a formidable competitor on the show, and over time, he became one of the most talked-about captains in the series. Yet fame can be a double-edged sword. The same attention that brings recognition can also bring scrutiny. And for Paul, that scrutiny would eventually reveal parts of his life that were far more complicated than what viewers saw on television. Long before the height of his television career, Paul had already faced challenges that would later resurface in the public eye. Reports and court records from the early 2010s revealed legal issues involving financial assistance programs. According to publicly available information, Paul had applied for certain benefits during a time when his income and employment status became a subject of investigation. Authorities later concluded that there were discrepancies between what had been reported and what had actually occurred. The case attracted attention, particularly as Wicked Tuna grew in popularity. For many viewers, it was surprising to see a television personality involved in such controversy. Critics were quick to judge, while supporters argued that mistakes in the past should not define a person's entire life. Regardless of public opinion, the situation became a lasting part of Paul's story. It served as an early reminder that life in the spotlight often means that personal struggles, both past and present, can become public knowledge. Despite these challenges, Paul continued fishing and continued appearing on Wicked Tuna. Season after season, he remained part of the competitive world that had made him famous. His determination to stay in the industry he loved was clear, and for many fans, his persistence was one of the reasons they continued to watch. But while controversy can be difficult, it was not the most painful experience Paul would face. In 2020, the world changed in ways no one could have predicted. The COVID-19 pandemic brought uncertainty, fear, and loss to millions of families. For Paul, the pandemic would bring a tragedy that struck close to home. During the production of a season of Wicked Tuna Outer Banks, Paul received devastating news. His father, a man who had played a central role in his life, had fallen seriously ill. Not long after, his father passed away in a nursing facility after contracting the virus. The loss was heartbreaking on its own. But what made it even more painful was the fact that Paul could not be there in his father's final days. Travel restrictions, filming obligations, and the realities of the pandemic made it impossible for him to return home in time. In interviews given later, Paul described the experience as one of the hardest moments of his life. Those who had followed his story knew how strong the bond was between father and son. It was his father who had introduced him to fishing, who had helped shape the path that eventually led him to the deck of a commercial fishing vessel, and years later, to television screens across the country. Losing someone who played such a foundational role in your life leaves a void that is difficult to describe. For Paul, that loss seemed to change something inside him. Fans began to notice subtle differences in his behavior on the show. The energetic, outspoken captain who once dominated conversations sometimes appeared quieter. The laughter was still there at times, but it seemed less frequent, less spontaneous. Grief affects everyone differently. Some people speak openly about their pain, while others carry it silently. Paul never publicly spoke at great length about his emotional state, but those who watched closely could sense that the loss had left its mark. At the same time, the atmosphere among the captains appeared to shift as well. The competition that defined Wicked Tuna remained intense, but there were moments when camaraderie seemed to take priority. It was as if everyone understood that the challenges of life extended far beyond the race to catch the next fish. For Paul, continuing to fish may have been a way to cope. The ocean had always been a constant in his life, a place where focus and determination could temporarily push aside everything else. The rhythm of the waves, the sound of the engines, the teamwork of the crew, these were things he understood, things he could control, at least to some extent. But even as he tried to move forward, another challenge began to emerge, one that had nothing to do with fishing and everything to do with the strange power of the internet. At various times, rumors began circulating online, claiming that Paul Hebert had died. Some posts alleged accidents at sea, others claimed sudden illness. Sensational headlines spread quickly, often accompanied by dramatic images designed to attract attention. For fans, the rumors were confusing and alarming. Many searched for confirmation, only to find conflicting information. Yet despite the dramatic claims, there was no credible evidence to support them. No official statements were released. No reliable news outlets confirmed the stories. And Paul himself continued to appear active, both in his work and on social media. Still, the rumors persisted. It was a reminder of how quickly misinformation can spread in the digital age, especially when it involves public figures. A single misleading post can be shared thousands of times, creating the illusion of truth where none exists. For Paul, such rumors were likely frustrating, even if he chose not to respond publicly to every claim. Living in the public eye often means losing control over your own narrative, as strangers speculate about your life from a distance. Yet through it all, Paul continued doing what he had always done, fishing, working, and moving forward. As the years passed, another major change came that affected not only Paul, but everyone connected to Wicked Tuna. After more than a decade on the air, the long-running series finally came to an end. For fans who had followed the captains and crews for years, it marked the close of an era. The show had captured not just the thrill of competition, but also the personalities and stories of the men who made their living on the sea. For Paul, the end of the show meant a transition. Television had been a significant part of his life, but it was never the only part. Fishing remained his livelihood, and he continued operating charters and commercial trips, drawing on decades of experience to keep his business running. Life after television can be difficult for many reality stars. The attention fades, the cameras disappear, and the routine changes. But for someone like Paul, whose identity was built on a lifelong profession rather than fame alone, there was always a path forward. Still, the years had taken their toll. Loss, controversy, and the pressures of public life had all left their mark. And while the ocean remained a constant, the man who stood at the helm was no longer exactly the same as the one viewers had first met years earlier. And perhaps that is the truth behind every story like this one. The strongest-looking people are often carrying burdens we cannot see. The loudest voices sometimes hide the deepest pain. And the lives we watch on television are only fragments of a much larger, more complicated reality. But Paul Hebert's story does not end here. Because beyond the rumors, beyond the loss, and beyond the end of Wicked Tuna, there are still more chapters to his journey. Chapters that reveal how he continued to rebuild his life, and how the challenges he faced shaped the man he would become. And that part of the story is just as important. When a long-running television series ends, it often feels like the closing of a chapter not only for the audience, but also for the people whose lives were followed on screen. For over a decade, viewers had watched the captains of Wicked Tuna battle each other and the unforgiving Atlantic Ocean. The competition, the tension, the victories, and the defeats had all become part of a familiar rhythm. So when the show finally came to an end, many fans wondered what life would look like for the captains, especially for someone like Paul Hebert, whose identity had become so closely tied to both fishing and television. But unlike many reality stars, Paul's career had never depended solely on the cameras. Long before television fame, he had built his life around the sea. Fishing was not a temporary opportunity or a stepping stone to something else. It was the foundation of everything he knew. After the show concluded, Paul continued working out of Gloucester, Massachusetts, one of America's most historic fishing ports. There, he focused on running charters and commercial tuna trips, guiding customers and crews through the same waters that had defined his life for decades. The ocean had always been where Paul felt most at home. While television brought recognition, it was fishing that gave him purpose. In many ways, life after Wicked Tuna was quieter, but it was also more grounded. Without the pressure of filming schedules and constant public attention, Paul was able to return to a more familiar routine. Early mornings, long days at sea, and the unpredictable challenge of chasing tuna. Yet the public never completely stopped watching. Even after the show ended, interest in the lives of the captains remained strong. Social media allowed fans to follow their favorite fishermen in real time, and Paul was no exception. Through posts and updates, people could see that he was still active, still working, and still doing what he loved. But with public attention also comes speculation, and the rumors that had circulated in earlier years did not disappear entirely. From time to time, misleading stories would resurface online, repeating false claims about his health or his life. These stories often spread quickly, shared by people who never stopped to verify whether they were true. For those who knew the reality, the truth was much simpler. Paul was alive, still fishing, and still building his business. But the persistence of such rumors highlighted something larger about life in the digital age, the way misinformation can take on a life of its own, sometimes overshadowing the truth. Despite these distractions, Paul remained focused on his work. Fishing requires patience, discipline, and resilience, qualities that cannot be developed overnight. Years of experience had taught him how to endure long stretches of uncertainty, how to stay calm when conditions turned rough, and how to keep going, even when success seemed far away. Those same qualities helped him navigate the personal challenges he had faced in his life. The loss of his father continued to weigh heavily on him. Grief does not disappear with time. It changes shape, becoming something quieter, but still deeply felt. For someone whose life had been shaped by that relationship, the absence was impossible to ignore. People who spend their lives at sea often develop a certain toughness, a habit of pushing through pain and focusing on the task at hand. But even the strongest individuals are not immune to loss. And for Paul, the memory of his father remained a powerful presence in his life, influencing the way he approached both work and life itself. Friends and colleagues sometimes noticed that he seemed more reflective than he had been in earlier years. The fiery competitiveness that once defined him was still there, but it was balanced by a deeper sense of perspective. Experience and hardship has a way of reshaping priorities. There was also the matter of public perception. For many viewers, Paul had always been a complex figure. Some admired his determination and honesty, while others criticized his blunt personality and the controversies that had followed him. Reality television has a way of amplifying both strengths and flaws, turning ordinary human behavior into something larger than life. But the truth is that no one can be reduced to a single image on a screen. The person viewers see for a few minutes each week is only a fraction of the whole story. Those who worked closely with Paul often described a different side of him, someone deeply knowledgeable about fishing, someone who cared about his crew, and someone who took pride in his work. Leadership on a fishing vessel is not just about giving orders, it is about responsibility. The safety of the crew, the condition of the equipment, and the success of the trip all depend on the captain's decisions. That responsibility is something Paul had carried for most of his life, and perhaps that is one of the most overlooked parts of his story. Beyond the headlines, beyond the rumors, beyond the dramatic moments on television, there was a man who had spent decades mastering a difficult and dangerous profession. Commercial fishing is not easy. It demands physical endurance, mental toughness, and a willingness to face risk every time you leave the harbor. Storms can appear without warning. Equipment can fail. Long hours and exhaustion are part of the job. For Paul, these challenges were not obstacles. They were simply part of life. Over time, the tragedies and controversies that had once dominated public discussion began to fade into the background. What remained was the reality of his daily life, working on the water, guiding charters, and continuing the profession that had defined him for so many years. And in that sense, his story became less about tragedy and more about endurance. Because endurance is not about avoiding hardship. It is about continuing forward despite it. Paul Hebert's life has been shaped by loss, by mistakes, by public scrutiny, and by the pressures of fame. But it has also been shaped by persistence, by hard work, and by a deep connection to the sea that never faded. For fans who watched him on Wicked Tuna, he will always be remembered as one of the most determined captains to ever appear on the show. For those who know the full story, he is also a reminder that the people we see on television are far more complex than they appear. Every life contains struggles that are invisible to the outside world. Every person carries memories and experiences that shape who they become. And sometimes, the strongest individuals are the ones who have endured the most. In the end, Paul's story is not just about tragedy. It is about resilience. It is about learning to live with loss, to face criticism, and to keep moving forward even when the path is difficult. And perhaps that is why his story continues to resonate with so many people. Because beyond the fame, beyond the controversy, and beyond the hardships, there is something deeply human in the way he kept going. The ocean does not care about the past. Every day on the water is a new challenge, a new beginning. And for Paul Hebert, as long as there are waves to navigate and fish to chase, the journey continues.